The big political story tonight and remains there are many sides to what happened in Charlottesville, according to the president. But he made it pretty clear today that there's only one side for Republicans in Congress. It's his. Today, he unloaded on Senators Lindsey Graham and Jeff Flake. They've been vocal critics on a number of topics from the president, including his response to Charlottesville. And there are also two Republican senators who've never been afraid to speak out against him. He called Senator Graham a liar, called Senator Flake toxic, and he cheered Flake's primary challenger in Arizona. The president also rallied behind the cause of many white nationalists by blasting the removal of Confederate statues. He called it foolish. He said our history and culture was being ripped apart. Folks, none of us have any clue about how we're going to get past this crisis. The president's actions today sent a pretty clear message to critics in his party. It's time to choose. You're either with him or you're against him. Well, Senator Graham fired back at the president. So did Senator Flake and his allies. Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican in the Senate, also didn't hold back. By the way, Lindsey Graham's partner in the South Carolina delegation.
What we want to see from our president is clarity and moral authority, and that moral authority is compromised when Tuesday happens. There's no question about that.
And Senator Bob Corker unloaded perhaps the harshest criticism we've heard from a sitting Republican senator not named Jeff Flake.
The president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful. He also recently has not demonstrated that he understands the character of this nation.
So some tough words from somebody who very much wanted to be this president's Secretary of State. It's been more than 200 days. If the president hasn't proven by now to Bob Corker that he's got the stability or competence to be president, or that he doesn't understand the character of the nation either, then the question for Republicans like Bob Corker is, what are you waiting for? Well, the answer could very well be that they're waiting for Republican voters to agree with their own assessment. Case in point, according to a new CBS News poll, a large majority of Republicans, 68%, say his description of who's to blame in Charlottesville is accurate. And if you want to understand why Republican leaders might argue they're not storming the castle, that's why. They may want to go, but what good is a rebellion if their voters aren't going to back it? And as the president himself made clear today, he's got folks more loyal to him, eager to fill a power vacuum left by a failed GOP insurrection, whether that's in the Senate or even in the White House. Joined now by four-term Republican Congressman J.C. Watts. He was the first black representative elected from the state of Oklahoma to serve in Congress. He was also the first African-American named to House Republican leadership. I'm also joined by the editor-at-large of the Weekly Standard, Bill Kristol. Congressman Watts, when we reached out to you, you said you very much had something to say. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand you the microphone, sir.
Well, Chuck, I think, like every other American, I've observed what's happened over the last week, or, well, post-last weekend. And I think trials, we are obviously seeing trials in our country, and I don't believe trials come to tell us what we are. I think they come to tell us what we are not, so that we know what we need to do to become what we all say that we want to be. And like Senator Scott said, I think when you look at a president, you look at the pastor of your church, your rabbi, you know, the superintendent of your schools, the CEO of the company, I think you want them to have the moral standing, in spite of their imperfections, in spite of their dysfunctions. You want them to have the moral fortitude to say this is right or this is wrong. And I'm quite burdened and saddened that we, you know, being the heir, as Reverend King would say, being the heir of rape, rope, fire, and murder, you know, I'm not angry about that. I'm not ashamed of that. But I am ashamed that we still have people in this country that would be so inhumane that they would do inhumane things to other American citizens. And so I think the president hurts himself, he hurts our country, when he does not speak with clarity about, you know, an issue that says pretty clearly 2 + 2 is 4, it's not 3.
I guess the question then is, and I want to bring Bill Kristol into this conversation, and I want you both to address this issue. But Bill, let me start with you. Look, you haven't been shy about your feelings about President Trump and where you believe you're concerned where he's taken the conservative movement. How do we get past this? Okay, we live in the reality, right? We don't live in the world of the Never Trump covers of 60 and all that stuff. How do we get past this moment? Because I can't figure it out.
Well, I've been trying to think about that. So I don't think it as much is very useful anymore to say if only Donald Trump would do X, or would that he would give us clarity, unity, and all this. So let's just accept him as he is. And then the question is, how do you limit the damage? How do others provide moral leadership? So on the issue that JC is talking about, luckily in this country, there's not just one dictator who speaks for the country. There are governors, there are mayors, there are congressmen and senators, there are private sector officials, priests, ministers, rabbis, imams. They all need to think hard, though, seriously about, well, how do I provide moral leadership? I live in Virginia. I think Terry McAuliffe is the governor. Maybe you should call together ministers, priests, rabbis, police chiefs, law enforcement officials, and say, in this Commonwealth, we're going to have equal justice under the law. In this Commonwealth, we don't accept the notion that the KKK and the neo-Nazis are respectable groups. And look, if every governor does that, it's not quite as good as the president doing it. He's got a unique bully pulpit, but others can do it. And on the practical side, in terms of Congress, I think they have to take the attitude, you've used the metaphor, storming a fortress or something. Yeah. I'm not sure what that would mean exactly, concretely, but think of the Soviet Union. You can contain it. They need to take the attitude not, gee, if only the president would give us leadership, we could work with him. They need to take the attitude of, he is who he is. We need to limit the damage and do what we can do to go around him.
Congressman Watts, I'm guessing you've always been an optimist, always have an optimistic demeanor, I've noticed over the years. Have you given up on this president? And if you haven't, and he called you into the Oval, and he says, make me understand why everybody's so mad at me about Charlottesville, Congressman, how would you explain it to him?
Chuck, he is the president, and I have some concerns that he doesn't understand the magnitude of what being a president is. And, you know, I have many people that disagree with me. Rob Portman doesn't agree with me on everything, but you know, Rob and I are friends, and he's got a moral authority with me. And Tim Scott and Rand Paul, I don't agree with them on everything. Bill Kristol, I appreciate the fact that Bill's been very vocal and hadn't backed down on where we are going as a country, and that we all need to be concerned about that. And so I would, you know, it would do me good. I've tried to reach out to the White House, to the Vice President's office. I know other African-American Republicans has tried to do that, to say, hey, look, you're going to hurt yourself every time you do it like this. You know, one of the things,
you say you've tried. You're implying that they haven't been receptive. Have they been receptive?
Well, Chuck, I'm not going to go there, but let me say this. You know, one of my real values to the Republican Party when I was in Congress was, I had enough credibility with my colleagues that I could say, hey, look, guys, I see what you're trying to do, but I wouldn't do it like that. I see what you're trying to say. I wouldn't say it like that. I was in control of communications, and, you know, we had about a 58, 59% approval rating at the time. I'm not so sure that he's got those type of people around him that could say to him, a Bill Kristol, that would have a moral authority to say, Mr. President, I will go to my grave believing that you're wrong in doing this. And now, we may do that, and he might say you're crazy as a $3 bill, but nevertheless, if somebody doesn't grab the attention of the president, the Republican Party is going to pay a serious price.
Bill, you have gone back and forth on whether you want to see some of these people that you respect a lot in the administration, that you'd like to see them resign. Send a message.
I've pretty much been steady on the serious one should stay.
Because I was just going to say,
contain the damage.
There is an argument in Newsweek, in the Daily Beast, where a Republican is arguing, stop calling for the resignation. Yeah, no, if you are concerned about, then you should want Kelly and Mattis to be there. Is that where you are?
No, I've defended them to my other Never Trump friends who are a little more extreme or have stronger views that you just are morally kind of contaminated by serving anywhere in the administration. I think they each have to make their own decision. If they think they're able to do more good, then do harm in some legitimizing. They understand, these people deep down, that they are, they are going to be tainted by this. I mean, they're paying a price for their own reputation, and I think they don't want to legitimize things they shouldn't legitimize. It's very different being a PR flack for Trump than being in charge of the National Security Council or the Defense Department. I had lunch today with someone at I shouldn't say a minor domestic cabinet agency, doing good work, I think, trying to help advance public policy for the country. Never deals with Trump, never deals with the White House, mid-level. I have no problem with that person being in there and trying to do his best. But so but I think they need to have their eyes open, and we need to be serious, because it is a real national crisis. It's not a problem with the Republican Party. I mean, 3.5 years absent Mueller fighting impeachment. It is a serious issue for the country, and you can't just say, gee, it's very uncomfortable for John Kelly to stand there with his head down. It was uncomfortable for him, but I give him credit, because I think if he weren't there, I mean, I feel better about the country's chances of avoiding real disaster because he is there.
Congressman Watts, I am curious, though. One of the other points I made at the start of this segment was this idea that, look, as you know, I would say a large majority of Republicans that are serving in Congress are upset with this president, viscerally so, not politically so, just personally, right? But they have been hesitant to speak out because their argument, and I've had this conversation with them out, they're like, what good am I to speak out if I'm the one that's ostracized from the party and nobody's listening to what I have to, the people who I want to listen aren't listening. This disconnect between where the party is, the rank and file, and where the rest of the leader is, how do you close that?
Well, Chuck, I think many members are probably afraid they're going to get tweeted, and they don't want to go through that ordeal. But nevertheless, I think we're looking at this. I think members of Congress, the American people, in my opinion, and only hold me to this opinion, I think we're looking at this the wrong way. We see this in terms of left and right. I think we're well into the arena of right and wrong. Yep. And if you can't have the Howard Bakers and the Barry Goldwaters that would have enough fortitude to go to the President of the United States and say, hey, Mr. President, at that time concerning Watergate, they said, too many lies, too many cover-ups, you've got to resign. Now, I'm not saying that the President should resign, but I'm saying that's the type of moral fortitude you had in the party. Somebody at least needs to say, Mr. President, you're killing us. We all have to wear the cap of the Republican Party when you're tweeting and when you're saying things and when you're doing things that I think most normal and civilized people say, that just doesn't feel right coming from the President of the United States. And Chuck, I don't say that necessarily to be critical. I just say that because I operated in the arena for 12 years, and there's just a decency that I think most Americans expect us to carry out.
J.C. Watts, former congressman from Oklahoma. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And sharing your views. Bill Kristol, as always. Thank you, sir.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.